Live action One Piece has blown away all expectations, especially mine. It's currently the #1 most viewed show in 84 countries, which means that it's beaten records set by Wednesday and Stranger Things Season 4. And I think that this is insane, but in the best way possible. I obviously have very mixed opinions on the live action, more of which I'm going to share here. But seeing this level of support for One Piece can't help but make me smile. Because even if I'm not personally the biggest fan, who cares? As long as people are enjoying it, that's all that matters. But I do have more things to say. Fun fact, in my review video, there was a point where I just had to stop writing because my hands were cramping. And then people in the comments were all like, why didn't you talk about this and that and these and those? Well, it's because of these mainly. But here's an important list of things that I didn't touch on. Firstly, execution cameos. The opening of the series is a treasure trove of cameos where we see Dragon, Mihawk, Shanks, Smoker, and a woman who is heavily speculated to be Crocodile. Either that or it's a very fun nod to the Crocomom theory. But my own personal theory is that even if they didn't show them, they shot everyone who they knew was going to be at this execution. Maybe not so much face in case of actor reasons, but like the back of their head or something, which includes Doflamingo, Gecko Moria, and Crocodile. And so when we do eventually meet them, we can flash back without having any continuity issues or needing to rebuild the sets and such. Stuff like that, because with the benefit of knowing what's going to come, you can be more efficient with your production. Alvida. I honestly really like this Alvida much better than the manga or anime version. She's always been very much a throwaway villain who Oda brought back into the story because he came up with an excuse to make her hot. But live action Alvida, mate, she has some genuine terror about her. She has this strong, deep voice and a set of very no-nonsense facial expressions. And I know that if I was on that ship, I would be afraid of her. So amazing actor, and I look forward to seeing more of her if a season 2 happens. Kobe. I like Kobe a lot. And thinking about it, pre-glow up Kobe must be a pretty difficult role to play because he's very weak and cowardly, which if you overplay it can get very annoying very easily. But I think this Kobe rides that line pretty damn well. Cinematography. So this has been very divisive amongst the fan base, even those who almost universally love the show. But because it's One Piece, the live action has taken a lot of creative liberties with good old cinematography. And one thing I want to flag are the super tight close-ups. Please stop doing this. I really hate being all up in people's faces, and I feel like I now know these actors much more intimately than I'd like to. Plus, the One Piece world is so big and these really tight shots make it feel like we're trying to hide or condense it. However, there are some times where these shots do work. Like during episode 4 when Nami, Usopp, and Kaya are hiding from Kuro. You get very tight close-ups of their faces, and it works because it makes the atmosphere feel claustrophobic. Meanwhile, a lot of the cinematography is simply gorgeous. Like Captain Morgan's office, for example. It has this perfect marriage of set design, lighting, and shot composition. And having since rewatched the show, there are a lot of moments of very subtle brilliance as well. Like at the end of episode 2, the Straw Hats come together, and they're all lit with their respective colors. Luffy is in red, Nami in orange, and Zoro in green, which are the kind of small details I love. Something I love a lot less is the selection of scenes which I think are just too dark. To be fair, maybe I'm just an old man, but I actually get eye strain trying to watch stuff like this for too long, and I think that it could stylistically be rectified. So for example, there's a ton of openings above Luffy and Kobe in this scene, so have some nice bright moonlight coming through. Something like that. But here's another controversial one, the Luffy flashback. I talked about how I didn't really like the structure of the flashbacks, but I didn't quite get into the content itself. To be blunt, the Luffy flashback doesn't land for me, and I think I know why. Because the Netflix marketing has spoken at great length about the challenges of finding the perfect Luffy, which I would argue they did with Iñaki. However, they didn't try as hard, or it was just flat out impossible, to find the perfect actor for child Luffy. I don't like criticizing child actors because I don't think it's in any way fair. I mean, they're so young, how could anyone possibly expect them to perform on the same level as a seasoned adult? But with that said, to me, this Luffy just isn't it. He doesn't exude that sheer joy and optimism that is the core of Luffy. He looks perpetually upset or perpetually in pain, rather than having that wide-eyed adventure lust. But also, Shanks falls quite flat to me. And this one's harder to describe, but to me, he doesn't have that charisma or presence that I feel every time I see Shanks on a page. I don't know what sort of sorcery Oda conjures, but as far as 2D drawings go, Shanks is stupidly compelling. And his actor here just doesn't quite live up to that, which is a problem because in this flashback, he's the one who has to do the bulk of the heavy lifting. The most important and iconic moments in the entire series happen in this flashback. Shanks losing his arm and Shanks giving Luffy the straw hat. And in the live action, they they are, at best, significantly watered down in terms of emotional punch. For the other red hair pirates, I love Lucky Roo. For the short time that he's on screen, he always manages to make an impression with a few simple expressions and gestures that completely encapsulates the character. Yasop is also great, and in fact, he and Lucky Roo to me are the ones that best convey that playful essence of the red hair pirates. These are your classic scallywags of the sea, but they can also switch to serious business in the snap of a finger. However, Ben Beckman, as many have pointed out, and I do feel kind of bad, because this actor has been focused on a lot on Twitter, and I have no doubt that he's a really great performer, but Ben Beckman is not the role for him. It really does just feel like your dad wearing a wig, as if there was an open casting call and the role was given out by lottery. On the other hand, someone who I think was perfect is Captain Morgan. What a phenomenal actor. He does both serious and comedy very well, and I just wish he got to push that a bit further and get a bit deeper into the Morgan from the manga, because I know that he would be fully capable of it. The dude can be pretty scary when he wants to, but he also works as a great comic foil, like with his scene with Luffy and Nami. And then there's Bogard. His presence always made me smile, because he is one of the biggest love letters to truly entrenched fans. And in regards to this, the live action is actually quite groundbreaking, because this is the first time in any medium that Bogard's name has been mentioned. There is no point in the manga, anime, or data books where Bogard is actually named. So the satisfaction when Garp said Bogard, that was immense. And Scottish, immensely Scottish. Immense Scottish satisfaction. A few people have also expressed disappointment that Whoops that wasn't in the series, but he actually is. In episode 2, he does appear, as does Choo Choo in a very small but very appreciated cameo. I love that dog. But Syrup Village. From what we've seen, a lot of people seem to agree that these are probably the weakest 2 episodes of the series, but at the risk of being contrarian, I actually quite like them. Syrup Village is the only arc in the live action that I think is given the time it needs to play out. Everything else feels a bit like a speedrun, but Syrup Village is just 2 really solid episodes of television. They're much more focused, and we actually take the time to get to know the characters on the island. It's really nice to have moments exploring Kaya's situation and forging a genuine friendship with Nami, and Kaya is a rare case of a character who gets more development in the live action than the anime or the manga. But also, Syrup Village gives more time for the villains to settle in, like how Sham and Butchie have these cute moments together where you get a sense of their dynamic. And my direct comparison against them would be Baratier, where Gin appears and disappears in the blink of an eye. His character is more of a tool to show that, hey, Sanji's a good guy, rather than a person of his own. So that's why I really like episodes 3 and 4, because no character feels that way to me. They all feel like actual people. People dressed as bizarre cats, but still, we have those in real life, so I'm gonna call them people. Although I do understand that stylistically, Syrup Village is probably the arc that feels the least One Piecey in the live action, and it's actually more akin to a 2-part episode of Doctor Who. Something where the Doctor and a companion find themselves trapped on an alien spacecraft and there's a murder monster going around. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I'm a big fan of that kind of storytelling. But I can understand why people feel maybe a bit weird about Syrup Village, because it is, again, it's the least One Piecey. Episode 3 does have my favorite ending of any episode though, which is Usopp desperately trying to get people to believe him, and then the camera pans around and Kobe is standing right there and he just says, I believe you. That is such a good ending. Oh, and they killed Mary, which is pretty wow, and feels like a direct response to the common One Piece criticism that no one ever dies. I will admit that it was a bold AF maneuver, although I do wonder who's taking care of Kaya now. For all the love I have for Syrup Village, there are admittedly a series of very stupid things that happen, such as the idea that Kuro didn't dispose of Mary's body instantly. He just dragged it a bit to the right and left it to be discovered. And there's also the idea that Kuro didn't kill Zoro. He just gets hit over the head with a bottle and then everyone's like, yeah, this is probably dead. No, stab him, slit his throat or something. Make sure the job is done, Kuro. This is why your plans always fail. And also at one point, Kuro did have a clear opportunity to kill Usopp. Kuro rushed at him, but for some reason, even though he had his 10 claws out, he decided not to use those. He decided to push Usopp instead. Also, in his fight against Luffy, there's a certain point where Kuro just seems to forget that he has super speed. In the manga, Luffy has to physically attach himself to Kuro to combat that movement. And Kuro does have a very funny line, which is, no one interferes with my plans. And I agree. No one interferes because they don't need to. Kuro very successfully self-sabotages every time. But I can't bring myself to fault the live-action Kuro, because his manga counterpart is also an idiot with terrible, terrible plans. So if anything, the live action was incredibly faithful faithful to him. All in all, I wish that every other arc got the Syrup Village treatment. And while I don't think the arc gives enough to Usopp, if anything, because as I've said before, he doesn't really get his hero moment, but look, I guess we can trade that in for the Kaya kiss. So it's canon. Usopp's got a girlfriend. Drakiel Mihawk. This was a real treat. I love his pompous attitude and the accent, and look, even for this show, it is a bit over the top, but I think it works because it's Mihawk. In this world, he's a very tired celebrity who just wants to live in peace. So when Mihawk rolls his eyes when Zoro says it's an honor to meet you, he's like, yes, I'm sure. That is so perfect. It also gives the Mihawk character a bit of a journey as well, because what started out as an annoying fanboy goes on to impress Mihawk, so much so that he has to begrudgingly admit that Zoro's honor as a swordsman is, quote, magnificent. It retains the spirit of Mihawk, but it gives him a fun new twist. And his fight with Zoro is generally amazing, with one tiny downer at the end, which is the CGI of Zoro's swords breaking. It was not great. And it also reminded me that this is only the second time that Zoro actually uses 3-sword style, the second of 2 in total. And to be fair, that must be really difficult to choreograph, but even more difficult to perform action scenes with a sword in your mouth. But truthfully, for most of the series, he is 2-sword style or even 1-sword style Zoro. Back to Mihawk, the only thing I didn't like about Mihawk is actually not a Mihawk thing. This is a Garp problem. Garp telling Mihawk not to underestimate Luffy is, I think, the most ridiculous thing that gets said in the live action. Arlong. I'm very happy to say that I think the trailer and the bounty release images did do him a bit dirty. I was afraid that he was going to be a super serious one-note villain, but he does have quite a bit of range. I'm still not sold on the design though. It never won me over. It just, I don't know, the nose looks too Squidward-y, he's not bulky enough, he's not threatening. Because overall, I felt more scared of both Buggy and Kuro than I did of Arlong. Especially because Arlong always shows up with this like fully sick beat accompanying him. It's like, it's like, oh, okay, Arlong's here. Which was always a bit immersion breaking because that is unlike any other music in the show. Arlong's fight with Luffy at Baratie is also not a great decision in my opinion. Arlong obliterates Luffy like it's not even close, which to me makes Luffy ultimately beating Arlong in episode 8 feel a bit unearned because all of a sudden he's just stronger now for no reason. I guess you could say that Luffy was more determined to win at Arlong Park. Maybe the stakes at Baratie were very low because it was just Luffy's life on the line. There was no one else to protect, but I think I'm just making excuses there. And to me, Arlong Park is where, what's the opposite of a payoff? But it's where the very swift pacing decisions throughout the series so far come around to really bite the climax in the ass. Because the Arlong arc is exactly that. It is the climax of East Blue. It's where the fictional pirate Avengers fully assemble for the first time and they each get their moment. Sanji gets his first fight as a crew member, Zoro gets to reaffirm his dream, Nami, it's obvious, but most importantly, Usopp. His fight against Chu is a monumental piece of growth, and one that I feel is severely lacking in the live action. And not because of the fight itself, but because Usopp himself is very lacking. We don't spend anywhere near enough time with him in the live action to really feel the weight of this victory. There's not enough emphasis on him being a coward, being weak, and all of his crippling self-doubt in the rest of the episodes to make this one feel like a proper breakthrough. It's like seeing the conclusion without having seen the struggle, which makes it just an event that happens. And I feel the same for Nami's help me moment as well. In isolation, it's a superb scene, but something about it doesn't feel quite earned to me. And I think it's because we had to really race to get to it in just under 7 hours. Hart-chan doesn't exist, so obviously Zoro doesn't get his moment either. He very much plays as backup for Sanji, which would be okay if the Sanji-Karubi fight landed, which to me, it doesn't. It's shot and edited quite jarringly. Like, instead of a fluid action scene, it's a lot of Sanji attacking the camera. Like, you'll see him hit Karubi in a very nice shot, and then we cut to Sanji yelling directly at the camera, and then he'll hit Karubi again, and we're back to yelling at the camera, and we just do this until he's beaten. And the finale of everything the Mouton shot is really lackluster. The way Karubi flies back is not amazing, and overall, this is probably the worst shot, edited, or choreographed fight in the series. I don't know which one it was, but one of those 3 things went very wrong. Or maybe a mixture, I don't know. And with Luffy, I've already said that his victory feels unearned to me, and I don't think that would be the case if we didn't see him get destroyed on Baratie. One thing I did really like was Sanji unknowingly using Luffy's line about finishing moves, and Zoro's like, yeah, you'll fit right in. That was great. But we do also have the Kokoyashi controversy, because a very curious decision they made during the Arlong arc was to have Nojiko and the villagers not know about Nami's sacrifice. So as a result, they legitimately despise her until this information is revealed. And I'm kind of torn on this because I do think that it does work in its own way, but it does sacrifice a moment of that subversive heart that Oda is so good at writing. Finding out that the villagers knew all along was the gut punch that warranted the help me moment. The idea that they were pretending so that Nami never felt bound to the village, and that if she so desired, she could go off and be free and not worry about them. And I think it undercuts Nojiko a lot as well. I mean, the entire reason why she has tattoos is a show of solidarity to Nami, who was ashamed of the tattoo that Arlong forced on her. Whereas I guess live action Nojiko just has tattoos because they look cool. With all of that said, I do think that this works well enough for an audience that has never seen One Piece, but it doesn't reach the potential of what it could have been. And in this case, it's not about budget, it's not about actor limitations, it is simply about time. We have to go through this series so quickly that the more nuanced ideas have to be streamlined, which is why I think a lot of the heart of One Piece in the live action to me feels quite diluted. Now, as for the Garp fight scene at the end, look, I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but it's also not amazing. To me, it's a very awkward conclusion to a very awkward series-spanning B-plot. In my opinion, Garp just should not have been in the series anywhere near as much as he was, if at all. But as for the epilogue, I really like that it was Kobe who delivered Luffy's bounty poster, calling back to episode 1 and giving the series a beautiful bookend, because Kobe knows how important this poster is for Luffy. So look, if Kobe's going to be here anyway, then having him do this is a nice, meaningful decision. The bounty reactions were also incredibly satisfying, and in general, the series ends on a beautiful high note, which is exactly how it should. And it does make me want to see more. But having seen it twice now, I do keep coming back to the same general conclusions as I did before. It has a lot of problems, and I think that 90% of them are due to the 8-episode mandate, which isn't at all the fault of the creatives involved. So I think they did about as well as they could to fit everything into 8 episodes, with the only big question remaining being the Marine B-plot. And someone who works in TV left a theory in the comments section of my last video that this was deliberately inserted as a budget measure. By which I mean, for cash money reasons, you need to cut the battle at Baratie, you need to cut the battle at Syrup Village, you need to cut the battle at Orange Town. Basically, if it's a battle, it's probably going to need to be cut down or just cut out entirely, because they're very expensive. And so what you do to make up for that is introduce a cost-effective B-plot to fill that space, which in the case of One Piece was Marines talking in rooms, or Marines talking on sets that the Straw Hats have already left. The production equivalent of recycling, really. And I'm inclined to believe it because Tomorrow Studios did a very similar thing with Cowboy Bebop. They cut down on a lot of the big action stuff, and what they did to supplement it was insert the vicious B-plot, which, come to think of it, generally took place in the same 2 to 3 rooms. There was the bar, there was his living room, and there was the Syndicate Council room. But I want to point this out because I do think that the production team were in a rough spot. I really don't think it was someone's stroke of creative inspiration to rewrite Garp into East Blue. I think it was just done out of necessity. But overall, this adaptation has outperformed expectations. So let me know in the comments, do you want to see a season 2? And also, do you think that the response has been good enough for Netflix to actually spend another $100 million on a season 2?